From Copenhagen, Denmark, we bring you this comprehensive report on a critical informal summit of the European Union, a gathering shaped by the ongoing war in Ukraine, the need for stronger collective defences, and the alarm raised by recent air incursions near EU borders. The summit brought together the bloc's top political leaders in a moment that many describe as decisive for Europe's security and strategic future. As the day began, the mood inside the Danish capital was both determined and tense. Leaders from across the continent arrived for the high-stakes meeting amid growing public debate about whether Europe can continue to rely almost entirely on NATO for its protection or must now develop an autonomous, integrated defence posture. The choice of Copenhagen as the venue was no accident. Denmark, long seen as cautious about EU-led defence integration, has in recent years embraced a stronger European security role and thus symbolised the shift underway across much of the continent. Early on, cameras captured a notable moment: Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in animated conversation with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Their brief exchange before the plenary session highlighted the diversity of viewpoints inside the EU. Orban, whose government has often urged a more restrained approach to military assistance for Ukraine and called for channels of dialogue with Moscow to remain open, appeared to stress caution. Meloni, by contrast, leads a government firmly aligned with NATO and has consistently supported both military and financial backing for Kyiv. Their meeting served as a vivid reminder that even in the face of shared threats, Europe's leaders approach solutions from different political traditions and national perspectives. Just a few steps away, European Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, and European Council President Antonio Costa were seen in quiet discussion. Soon after, they were joined by European Parliament President Roberta Metsola. The sight of these four figures, representing the EU's political, executive and legislative branches, underscored the collective weight behind the summit's agenda. Their brief exchange before entering the hall signalled the effort to project unity at a time when Russia's continued military pressure on Ukraine and cross-border drone incursions into NATO and EU airspace have unsettled many European citizens. Meanwhile, Austrian Chancellor Christian Stocker was shown taking his seat at the large round table, an image that resonated with observers. Austria, traditionally more reserved on hard security matters, was visibly part of the deliberations, signalling that even those who once hesitated about deeper defence engagement now see the urgency of acting together. As the meeting began and heads of state settled into their places, the atmosphere was described by correspondents as intense but focused. The leaders were not only reaffirming their political solidarity with Ukraine, they were also confronting the reality that Europe's defences, especially its air surveillance and interception capacities, have come under scrutiny after a string of drone and missile incidents near Estonia, Poland, and even over Danish waters. These events, widely interpreted as provocations or probes by Russia, have reignited calls for a coordinated, continent-wide response. The opening plenary session reportedly set the tone by acknowledging that the security environment has changed irreversibly since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Several leaders emphasised that the EU cannot afford to treat the war as a distant conflict or rely indefinitely on others for critical military hardware and planning. Instead, they argued Europe must accelerate the strengthening of its own defence industry, logistics networks, and rapid response capabilities, all while remaining anchored in NATO. The choice of Copenhagen as the summit site added historical resonance. Denmark, after years of opting out of some EU security policies, has pivoted in recent years to become a vocal supporter of a stronger European defence role. Hosting the summit highlighted this shift and conveyed to other member states that former skeptics now see collective defence as an existential priority. Beyond the symbolism, the substantive discussions focused on three intertwined themes. The first was sustained support for Ukraine, ensuring that weapons deliveries, air defence systems and financial assistance remain steady despite political debates within member states. The second was the acceleration of Europe's defence industrial capacity, building more artillery shells, drones and air defence components at home to avoid dangerous dependence on limited external suppliers. The third was the coordination of these efforts through mechanisms such as the proposed Strategic Air and Frontline Enhancement Initiative, known by its acronym SAFE, which aims to bolster the security of NATO's and the EU's eastern flank. Diplomatic sources indicated that, behind closed doors, discussions were candid, while leaders from Poland, the Baltic states, and Denmark pressed for immediate ramp-ups in air defence deployments and warned against any concessions to Moscow. Hungary's Viktor Orban argued that Europe must also keep diplomatic channels open and avoid measures that could escalate the conflict. This divergence of emphasis is not new, but in Copenhagen it played out in a constructive, though sometimes pointed, exchange. Observers noted that despite differing tones, the debate was less about whether Europe should stand by Ukraine and more about how fast and through what frameworks it should act. Several leaders advocated for a central EU-level procurement programme for military supplies to achieve economies of scale and faster delivery. Others preferred a combination of national contributions coordinated through NATO, arguing that such an approach preserves flexibility and respects diverse defence traditions within the bloc. Throughout the day, the images captured by cameras told their own story. Leaders leaning in during private conversations, aides passing notes and briefing folders, and the Danish hosts ensuring smooth proceedings. All of these moments illustrated the hard work of diplomacy that often goes unseen but underpins every joint statement and policy step. Outside the closed-door sessions, press briefings from officials emphasized that while the summit was informal and did not produce a final communiqué, it helped narrow differences on key issues. Officials hinted that progress was made toward commitments to expand joint training for Ukrainian forces, invest more in shared air defence networks, and increase Europe's capacity to replenish its own arsenals while sustaining aid to Kyiv. Commentators following the summit have suggested that the Copenhagen meeting will be remembered less for concrete announcements and more for the sense of momentum it conveyed. In a period when public debates about defence spending, energy prices and domestic priorities often compete for attention, the visual of Europe's top leaders sitting shoulder to shoulder to discuss common security challenges carried symbolic weight. As evening fell over Copenhagen, it became clear that the gathering had underscored a hard truth. Europe's security environment has changed fundamentally. The war in Ukraine, once seen as a crisis on the EU's periphery, is now widely recognized as a direct challenge to the stability of the entire continent. The incursions into European airspace have only reinforced the perception that Europe must be prepared to defend its own skies, as well as support its neighbour under attack. Diplomats departed Copenhagen with an understanding that the coming months will be decisive. They will need to translate the unity displayed in the Danish capital into binding decisions in Brussels on budget allocations, procurement policies, industrial incentives, and military coordination. The debates will continue, but the summit showed that the political will to move forward is strengthening. In the days ahead, Europe's leaders will return to their capitals to brief their parliaments and publics on the discussions held in Copenhagen. For citizens across the continent, the summit signaled that the EU is moving toward a new era in which defence policy is not an abstract topic, but a core element of national and European security. The story of this summit is therefore not one of final resolutions, but of a bloc recognizing that its response to conflict and threats at its borders can no longer be delayed or fragmented. The gathering in Copenhagen represented a step, perhaps modest in appearance but significant in direction, toward a more coherent, more prepared, and ultimately more secure Europe. Reporting from Copenhagen, this has been a detailed account of a pivotal moment in Europe's collective effort to support Ukraine and to safeguard the continent's own defence in the face of ongoing challenges.